Hello and welcome. My name is Simon and the following presentation is a critical analysis of behaviourism. Throughout the presentation, I will outline the key components of the theory, including its significance both historically and in current pedagogy, explore some practical applications of the theory within the classroom, examine some benefits and limitations of its application, and share my personal beliefs about the effectiveness of the theory from a student and pre-service teacher perspective. Behaviourism is a theory of learning that is characterised by its emphasis on the learner's response to a stimulus, resulting in observable changes in their behaviour. Behaviourists maintain that the manipulation of external stimuli can influence the learner's response, thus teaching them a new behaviour. Historically, behaviourism was a response to Freudian beliefs about the introspective nature of psychology and its focus on emotional experiences, impulses, and consciousness. Behaviourists such as American psychologist B.F. Skinner viewed these as unobservable and subjective elements. Behaviourism was intended to define psychology as a natural science, reinforced by observable and quantifiable data. Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov and his work studying digestion and salivation in dogs greatly contributed to our understanding of stimulus-response processes. Pavlov noticed that dogs in his studies began to salivate at the sight of a laboratory assistant that fed them before the introduction of their food. He soon conditioned the dogs to respond in the same way to an external stimulus, in this case the sound of a tuning fork, a process known as classical conditioning. Following response to external stimulus, modification of behaviour through positive reinforcement is known as operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is most effective when teachers take into account the impact reinforcers have on students and the timing and consistency of the chosen reinforcement. The Premack principle asserts that the preferred behaviour of an individual can be exploited to reinforce desired behaviour. In other words, rewards that contain a behaviour that an individual enjoys, such as playing video games, theoretically will influence them to perform a task they would not usually choose to undertake on their own, such as doing homework. Skinner's experimental work provided evidence that patterns of activity can quickly emerge in animals and human beings as they respond to repeated reinforcement or feedback. Skinner believed that it is natural for humans to behave in ways that elicit positive reinforcement and develop the related personality traits that enable us to become integrated members of society. Behaviourism is built on the premise that learners can be trained to behave in certain ways when they receive praise for doing so, and according to Gill, this thinking dictates much of what occurs within school communities on both classroom and policy levels. Negative reinforcement can refer to the removal of an unpleasant stimulus, for example, the removal of anxiety when submitting an assignment ahead of time. Students may be more inclined to submit assignments early every time as the removal of anxious feelings has negatively reinforced their behaviour. Behaviourist theory suggests that when contiguity occurs, meaning the connection between stimulus and the desired response is made and reinforced, this response is likely to reoccur when the actions involved are repeated. The key objectives of behaviourist practices are for learners to become self-efficient and no longer reliant upon reinforcement to elicit desired behaviours. Direct instruction is one teaching strategy that is underpinned by behaviourist theory. Through the meticulous planning and sequencing of lessons, teachers can break down instruction into a required set of isolated skills. These smaller, simpler components can be practiced and mastered before advancing to more complex and challenging skills. The benefits of direct instruction include enabling students to develop their speed and accuracy of specific skills, providing students with clearly defined learning outcomes, and providing teachers with identifiable measurements of individual success, such as test results that can inform future lesson planning. This approach was evident in my grade 6 teacher's mathematics instruction. My classmates and I were subjected to weekly Monday morning times tables tests. To achieve fluency through repetition, for every incorrect answer, the student responsible would be required to write out the particular set of times tables 10 times. The only reward for a 100% test result was to not be required to do this. This was homework to be accomplished outside of school hours, and the negative reinforcer in this case was the loss of one's free time. In my case, the behaviourist principle of contiguity only served to establish a connection between Monday mornings and feelings of fear and anxiety. From the behaviourist perspective, learning is achieved when teachers successfully pass on a set of skills to students, suggesting that the purpose of education is to provide students with the correct response to particular stimuli. Conversely, it is my opinion that learning and true mastery involve deeper cognitive processes that cannot be observed, such as reflection on past experiences and observations, creativity, and the individual's intrinsic motivational factors. With regard to reading instruction, behaviourist-based teaching models that describe reading as a behaviour comprised of a number of isolated skills have been criticised for not offering learners opportunities to consider their own experiences or the related social and cultural aspects of interacting with texts. According to Bloom's taxonomy, skills acquisition of this kind exercises memory and recall but does little to initiate higher order thinking. According to Collins, critical thinking of this kind requires a deeper understanding of new knowledge and its practical application beyond the classroom context. I believe that constructive student-centered approaches to reading instruction, such as the 4 resources model, are far more appropriate for addressing contemporary literacy demands. As pointed out by Ray and Medwell, the constant evolution of language, technology and society requires modern students to interact with new forms of text and become multiliterate. I believe it is the responsibility of teachers to recognise literary practices that students value and adjust their pedagogy to support student engagement and authenticate their learning experience. During my research for this presentation, I became aware that much of my own education was delivered via direct instruction. Behaviourist theory has inadvertently influenced my ideas about teaching through a phenomenon known as an apprenticeship of observation. Much of my school experience involved teacher-centered instruction that I feel did not meet the theoretically underpinned objectives that direct instruction is supposed to offer. One of these objectives being an incremental progression through skills acquisition in order to secure individual progress. I recall a classmate, who I'll refer to as Jay, with whom I'd spent the majority of my scholastic career. Jay's delay in literacy was evident to me from grade 4, and he continued to struggle throughout primary and high school. Jay had difficulty comprehending large passages of text and avoided reading aloud in class. When he was called upon to do so, he was subjected to a mockery from peers as he read at a slower pace to the rest of the class. I believe this greatly affected his confidence in reading and comprehension and had a negative impact on his intrinsic motivation to read. Had the direct instruction strategies employed by our teachers met their theoretical objectives, this may not have been the case for Jay. Although the majority of my peers became successful readers and did benefit from the chosen pedagogical approach, I do not feel that direct instruction alone would have been appropriate for developing Jay's literacy skills. If we assume that Jay had acquired the repertoire of skills necessary for success, evidenced in his phonemic awareness and word recognition, we could not account for the cognitive processes at work that might shed light on his difficulties with comprehension. As highlighted by Duchensi and McMaugh, a major criticism of behaviourism relates to its perception of unobservable cognitive processes as unnecessary in influencing learning and its lack of concern for the individual's intrinsic reinforcement. Gill supports this concern, questioning behaviourism for excluding intuitive thinking and the inquisitive nature of young students when describing what happens during the learning process. Cramlinger and Huberty acknowledge the advantages of behaviourist pedagogy and its ability to modify behaviour and provide quantitative results of skills acquisition. However, omitting unobservable processes of learning such as intrinsic reinforcers, according to Egan and Kalchak, is an extremely difficult task. As noted throughout my presentation, behaviourism asserts that humans can learn to behave in different ways through the use of consistent positive or negative reinforcement. Teaching strategies that are grounded in behaviourist theory, such as direct instruction, can be effectively implemented to ensure students master a range of specific skills. Through the measurement of observable events and assessment data that informs lesson planning, teachers can gauge individual student levels before incrementally proceeding through curriculum. I believe behaviourism and its associated pedagogical approaches can offer educators effective tools to support learning. However, as with all theoretical approaches to instruction, strengths and weaknesses must be evaluated to inform the appropriate use of these tools to cater for differentiation amongst individual learners. Thank you.